Hello, this is Priscilla Rice, and I'm coming to you from Live Oak Recording Studio. This week, we're going to have a rebroadcast of one of our earlier classic podcasts. We hope you enjoy it, and thanks so much for listening. Episode number 518. Want more referrals? Show up.
You're listening to the official BNI podcast with BNI founder and Chief Visionary Officer, Dr. Ivan Misner. Stay tuned for networking and referral marketing tips from the man who's been called the father of modern networking, along with suggestions and insights into getting the most from your membership in the world's largest networking organization, BNI.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the official BNI podcast, brought to you by the Networking for Success channel on YouTube, which features Dr. Ivan Misner and many other networking experts. I'm Priscilla Rice, and I'm coming to you from Live Oak Recording Studio in Berkeley, California, and I'm joined on the phone today by the founder and the Chief Visionary Officer of BNI, Dr. Ivan Misner. Hello, Ivan. How are you, and where are you this week?
I just got back from a visit to the Tucson BNI region. Love that region. I've been there several times, and it was great to be back.
Good. What is this podcast about?
So, title of the podcast is "Want More Referrals? Show Up." So here's a question to everyone in BNI listening to this podcast or reading the transcript. Would you like to substantially increase the number of referrals that your BNI chapter generates? If you answered yes, listen up, because here's how. Years ago, many years ago, I had a chapter president call me with a proposition. He said his chapter felt that the attendance policy was a hassle and they didn't believe it made any difference in referrals. As a matter of fact, he said he felt it was actually a drawback to membership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I told him, look, I didn't create the policy. It was created by the Board of Advisors, which is made up exclusively of BNI members. And he said that his group, I'm not making this up. So he said his group wanted to test something out. That they wanted to show me and the board that the attendance had no impact on referrals, or it had no impact on membership, none. So, yeah, you chuckle. Yes, at that point I wasn't chuckling because we didn't have hard data back then, and I'm like, okay, fine. This attendance thing is driving me nuts. Anyway, so he asked me if I would publish the findings in our newsletter, and to ask the board to reconsider this policy if they could document that it made no difference. I happily agreed to both. So they used the prior quarter as their baseline, and they began focusing on improving attendance, starting with the next month. It's important to note that during this time, they did nothing else other than improving attendance. They really didn't focus on anything else other than improve attendance. Now, I'm going to include a couple of graphics in this podcast, and it'll show some of the data that I'm talking about here so you can visually see the graphic. So they used the prior quarter, and they then for 6 months, and they looked at it on a quarter-by-quarter basis. They did it for 6 months. So what were their results? Well, they increased or decreased their absences. They had roughly 0.6 absences per member per month. So roughly every member missed a meeting every other month, roughly, the way to put it. And in their first quarter, they dropped their absenteeism by, actually the first chapter was 0.7, and they dropped their absenteeism by 52%. So a big drop in absenteeism. After 6 months, they significantly dropped absenteeism by a whopping 71%.
Wow.
But what about referrals, you ask? Referrals went up by 62%, as you can see in the graphic. So what started at 0.7, I said 0.6 at first, it was 0.7 absences per member per month. They dropped it after 6 months to that absenteeism by 71%. and the referrals went up 62%. Now, as an added bonus, membership went up 50%. Hard data, and this is the chapter tracking it. So at the end of their little experiment, the president called me and said, yeah, never mind. It's clear that absenteeism hurts the performance of the group. and, we don't want to change anything. So I thanked him, and I thanked the group for doing the study, and I asked if I could publish the results, and they graciously agreed. But here's where the story gets really, really awesome. After I published the original article, and I think this is like in the 90s at first, I had another chapter president call me up after he saw that article. And he called me up and he said, you made this stuff all up. I said, I didn't make this up. Call the president. Confirm it himself. And I'll never forget what he said next. He said, no, this guy's probably in your pocket. He'll do whatever you tell him to do. I'm like, wow. you don't know BNI members, I thought. So I said, okay, well, if you don't want to call him, how can I help? What can I do for you? So he went on to say his group that felt that even though even if the data were true, and he didn't think it was, he said 6 months wasn't long enough to confirm the results. And it should be for at least a year. And he wanted to focus on reducing absenteeism for a year to show me that the results would be different. The study went longer. I told him I thought it was a great idea. And I thought it might be interesting to see if there was a difference. And interestingly enough, there was, in fact, a big difference in the results by tracking it a year longer. The second group started with very similar absenteeism. They had the 0.6 absences per member per month. And they had really similar results at the end of 6 months. They dropped absenteeism by more than 50%, and their membership went up by 55%. Their referrals went up 71%, pretty close to the first group. But here's where it gets amazing. At the 9-month mark, their absenteeism was stable with a drop of over 50%. So they dropped half their absenteeism. But their membership had increased a whopping 90%.
Wow.
And their referrals went through the roof with an increase of 164%.
Wow.
And you can see all those numbers in this table that we'll include here. So after 9 months, the president called me up and he also said, yeah, never mind. We get it. Absenteeism clearly brings down results a lot. And although they stopped tracking the data at 9 months, I stayed in touch with the chapter for a long time. And they continued to focus on attendance. And they grew to be a well over 40-member chapter. And by that time, they were passing more referrals than they ever thought possible.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense.
It really does.
Because if a person is sitting across from you at a table and it jogs your memory, you start thinking of things you need to do with them or who you need to talk to about them, and you go and you do it.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's part and parcel of that timed repetition. That every week you're getting in front of people, you're constantly being reminded of them, and if they're doing it right, they're teaching you something every week. They're teaching you some little aspect of their business, which makes it easier for you to refer them. And so you've got to be there. You can't get a haircut over the phone.
Right.
And you can't have a successful BNI group if you don't show up. Absenteeism affects membership and referrals. The results couldn't be clearer. There is a direct and dramatic linear correlation between absenteeism and referrals. As the groups decrease their absences, they increase their membership, which substantially increased their referrals. High absenteeism results in low referrals. Low absenteeism results in high referrals. We talked about this in a previous podcast. I don't remember the number of the podcast, but it was that study that was done in Italy, Priscilla. And I'll try to find that podcast and include it here as a link. Because there was, yet again, more hard data that absenteeism will bring down the success of a chapter. So the lesson here, and I'd love to hear any other thoughts you have, is that if your chapter is lax on attendance, it's going to affect your pocketbook. That's just plain and simple. If you're lax on attendance, it's going to affect your pocketbook.
I think you're right. And the last thing I'd like to say is that if you're absent, you're not going to bring a guest, and the guests are a great source of referrals. So it'll affect it in two ways.
Yeah, guests and visitors are definitely a great source of referrals. They're also, obviously potential new members, which brings in more referrals.
Right.
I think, look, I get it. It's not easy to do this. But let me tell you, the results can be amazing if you do it right. I've said this many times in my podcast. Why accept mediocrity? Excellence is an option. Excellence is an option. Start today. Bring excellence to your group. Focus on reducing absenteeism, and I promise you're going to get better results. Well, that's everything for today. Priscilla, back to you. Oh, wait, hang on. I just found the episode that I was talking about there, where there was another study done in Italy. It's episode number 490, and it was a study done by a BNI member, Beatrice. So go listen to podcast 490, and you'll see yet more data that supports what we talked about here today. Now I'm done, Priscilla. Back to you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Dr. Meisner. Well, I'd just like to remind the listeners that this podcast has been brought to you by the Networking for Success channel on YouTube. Thank you so much for listening. This is Priscilla Rice, and we look forward to having you join us again next week for another exciting episode of the official BNI podcast.